Our next speaker, okay, we're going to our next speaker, Jeroen Franse. Probably I'm not pronouncing your name well, so you can repeat it, please.
Sure, it was very close. My name is Jeroen Franse. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming, for being here, and for sharing your experience and your knowledge. Jeroen has a background in astrophysics, obtaining his PhD from Leiden University, the Netherlands. Since then, he has focused on ML Ops and responsible AI as data science consultant, and his current position as senior machine learning engineer at ABN AMRO, a major Dutch bank. Most relevant for today, though, is that he's the co-founder and chair of the independent nonprofit foundation for best practices in machine learning. And that's what we are so excited to hear about, the best practice in machine learning. Thank you, Jeroen.
Thank you for the very nice introduction. I'm also very excited. I'm getting a message that first Anthony has to stop share his screen before I can share mine.
Yes, yes. Anthony, stop sharing screen, please. Can you? Okay, we are great. So I'm going to switch off my video now. So welcome, Jeroen. You can start.
Thank you. So you should be able to see my my big screen presentation now, right?
Yes, yes, we
awesome,
can.
Great. All right. Again, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for, of course, the invitation to this special session. It's been very interesting so far. As I said, very excited to be here and talk to you about the best practices for responsible machine learning that we've recently open sourced with our foundation. And that foundation is the Foundation for Best Practices in Machine Learning. So we started about half a year ago or so. And to be honest, we did that because we were a little bit frustrated by sort of the lack of practical frameworks or oversight, be it regulatory or otherwise, for applied responsible machine learning. And by that, I mean that although there's a lot of really excellent work being done and the topic is getting talked about quite a lot, we felt that applied responsible machine learning really wasn't finding its way into the operationalized products fast enough or enough in general. So that's what we decided to try and do, to see if we can speed up that process. And that is why our mission is to champion ethical and responsible machine learning through open source best practices and free public knowledge. That is also why all our foundation members are volunteers and why they range over a very broad range of backgrounds. We've got machine learning engineers, data scientists, statisticians, legal professionals, UX professionals, academics, and so on and so forth. It's also why our foundation is a non-profit. And when I say open source, I mean that our best practices are licensed under the Creative Commons Attributions license. And that means that everyone is free to use them also for commercial purposes, as long as it's attributed to the foundation. So in short, we need ethical and responsible machine learning because machine learning has been quite hastily operationalized. And that sometimes results in harmful and unfair consequences, maybe even a little bit more than sometimes. I'm sure we've all seen plenty of examples over the past few years already. And our best practices try to solve this by focusing on three pillars. The first one is contextualization. That just means that every case, right, is a little bit different, so the solution needs to depend on the specifics of the situation. Secondly, prudent machine learning operations and product management. This is about the life cycle management of machine learning models, but also about the development cycles of the product as a whole. And thirdly, deep organization support, by which we mean that the organization cannot just heap all the responsibilities and all the burdens upon the development team, but it should provide them with tools and other support so that the data science, the machine learning department is not an isolated silo somewhere in the organization. So this should lead to fairer and safer machine learning, lower associated risks, but let's also not forget that this will also lead to robuster models and models with better performance, and for organizations it should also lead to higher R&D success rates. So there is one main point that I would really like to stress, and that's the following. There is quite a big gap between lofty principles and application. And there exist, of course, many great guidelines that are based on principles, and we can all, I think, agree on those guidelines, but there is really very little to no guidance on what they mean in practice and how to achieve them for, let's say, the average data scientist. And that is, of course, because it is very, very hard to do, to be normative when so much depends on the context. We cannot really we cannot create universal normative rules at the level of detail of practical application. Right? We cannot write a complete set of if-then rules. So, and that's not just because it depends on the context, but also because it depends on the time and place and societal context that a problem occurs. And that is, of course, also a moving target. And also many of these questions are proper dilemmas in the sense that there's often not one clear proper answer. So what we try to do is to walk this tightrope between being practical on the one hand and being generic on the other hand. And our solution is to be as detailed as possible right up until the moment that we run into normative issues or we lose general applicability. So that means that we do not give the answer to the normative issue, but we help identify and detect those issues and identify the methods to resolve them and to help unpack the solution in one's own context. Let's have a look at a bit of an overview of the stuff that we have and the stuff that we do in a little bit more detail. So the best practices are, of course, the core of what we do. These are a set of documents, and you can think of them as a rather complete repository. We try to be complete anyway. So this is not a silver bullet, like I just mentioned. It's not a list of instructions that one can mindlessly follow so that magically everything will be ethical. But because we try to be complete, the best practices are rather large documents. And therefore, we have a number of things around the best practices to help apply them. And firstly, there are the user guides. These are quite small, accessible documents. And these help people to navigate the best practices, to help them get started, to find the most relevant best practices for their situation. There's also the open source portal. Of course, the open source best practices need a way for the community to contribute to the best practices. So we've got a wiki-style portal for that purpose. That wiki-style portal is also there to provide room for supporting material, by which we mean examples, elaborations, references, perhaps literature, that kind of stuff. We are working on filling that room with supporting material, but we also expect that the community will be able to provide a lot of it. Lastly, we expect that there is quite a lot of room for an ecosystem of tools to develop around the best practices. Tools to help document the work, or to help navigate the best practices, or to help administer the use of the best practices inside an organization, stuff like that. So you might be wondering who the best practices are for. And the short answer is that they're for everyone. And by that, I mean that we purposefully designed the best practices to be suitable for all different kinds of audiences. So data scientists, machine learning engineers, data science managers, but also professionals in governance, legal, compliance, and management in general. And the same goes for organizations. So it's suitable for any organization, pretty much regardless of size, risk, domain, maturity, resources, and societal impact. Of course, sometimes we do need to go into details. We definitely don't shy away from that. But in general, this means that best practices can serve as a sort of common language or common starting point for all of these audiences. The user guides I mentioned just before, they in particular will provide specific handholds for the specific audiences. So the best practices are two documents. I mentioned that already. One of them is for a single product. That's the technical best practices. Then we have the organizational best practices, and the scope for this is an entire organization. But both of these documents are based on the same set of subjects, and you can see them in the middle. I'm not going to go through all of them. These subjects are enter into the technical best practices through lifecycle phases. You might be familiar with them. We define the product definition phase, exploration, development, and deployment phases. And in the organizational best practices, the subjects enter through policies. And for now, you can think of policies as any set of tools or protocols or guidelines that the organization creates and provides to their product teams to help them execute their work. So there's something I want to mention about this list of subjects, and that is that we made this particular clustering essentially based on the kind of perspective one needs while doing the work. I'll make one small example. That's the fairness and non-discrimination section is about biases, preventing biases that you can, in principle, if you have the data and you're allowed to use the data, that you can measure relatively easily. Whereas the section on representativeness and specification is about trying to think ahead about all the things that might be going on with your data or your data collection process, or all the things that you might, all the things that might go into your model development and specification that could result in biases that are actually very difficult or even impossible to measure afterwards. So in short, the clustering of these subjects is not based so much on similar risk outcomes, but on similar risk detection methods. And that makes them much easier to apply because they're clustered by the type of work, the sort of type of thinking, the type of mindset you're in at any given time. So let's go into a little bit more detail still. First, the technical best practices. I already mentioned this is about a single product. And by a single product, we really mean an end-to-end thing. So this is not just about the machine learning model and the data, but also about the user experience and also the processes and the integration, all the stuff that is needed to go from the result of some software to actually applying it to the real world, to your clients, for example. So this means that this document is meant for the entire product team. So that includes data scientists and engineers, but also product managers, UXers, and also a little bit governance and data science managers. The components within this document are split in two, and that's product management, because that's really sort of a very interesting topic in its own right, and then basically all the other subjects that I just mentioned in section B there. I'm showing you here a little example from the best practices. I'm not going to go into any of these examples for time reasons, but I do want to show you what it looks like. So here we have a screenshot from the PDF version of the best practices. We're in the section of representativeness and specification in the phase, in the subsection for the exploration phase. So you can see that every item has a number and a name, and then there's a control, which is basically what to do. And then there's an aim, which is about why you do it, of course, but the aim is also there to help people, to give people a context. So to help them think through any issues or dilemmas that may arise. Then for the organizational best practices, these are about how to effectively and structurally support your product teams. And what we mean by this is also that machine learning should be sort of a constant theme throughout the organization and not just be isolated in one department. The components that we have in this document are the following. The first one is sort of about the macro organizational structure. So this is really for ensuring oversight for ethical machine learning. The second section is a little bit more detailed, also is about support and oversight structures, but is more about the responsibilities of the various owners and managers. And this is where the subjects that I showed before really come back in terms of policies and similar. And then we also have a section on resource management, which is of course about finances, but more importantly, it's about human resources and diversity of skill sets. There's a section on incidents of response, how to respond as an organization to incidents related, for example, to security or safety, and ethics, public interest, and legal or ancillary functions to support machine learning throughout the organization, to not just let that kind of stuff fall onto the development team who've usually haven't really got the background for that. So the audience for this document is a little bit less technical. So data science managers, governance, management in general, and legal, typically speaking. All right, I'm just checking the time. I think I have time to make one more remark before going to my closing slides.
Yes, you have. Yes.
Excellent. And the point I want to make is that the organization best practices document and the technical best practices document are really equally important. And it's for the following reason. We found that by far the majority of developers, I'm just using the word developers here to mean all kinds of data scientists and engineers, the majority of them really do want to make something reliable and safe and good. But even the most diligent developers will get worn down if they experience enough impediments and waiting around and red tape and uncertainty and more waiting around. And when they get worn down, they will subconsciously start to care only about the thing that they will be judged on the short term, which is almost always delivery. So it's sort of literally psychologically impossible for a single data scientist, or maybe even a few data scientists, to care about all the things that need to be cared about in a machine learning project. And I don't know how many of you have experience in the corporate environment, but in an environment like that, especially, there are a lot of things that a data scientist is not really, not really hired to do. So there are privacy assessments, risk assessment, data engineering, UX design, stakeholder management, infrastructure engineering, data sharing limitations, security assessments, and I could go on and on and on. And then, yes, maybe there's also some actual data science and machine learning to do. So these are all things that the data scientists didn't really sign up for. So the organizational best practices, in conclusion, are there so that the organization can provide the correct resources, the correct skills, provide the structure for proper delegation and ownership of responsibilities, proper incentives and stuff like that, so that it becomes psychologically bearable that all the things that need to be cared about are actually cared about in practice. All right. To wrap up, our best practices have been released for about 2 months now, and we're very happy to say that we've been getting a lot of positive feedback. And we're also very happy to say that it seems to align really well with the recent work by various regulators and researchers. Of course, I'm talking about the draft proposal from the EU, but also the ICO from the UK has released their beta version of their data and AI, their AI and data protection framework. Our work aligns really well with that as well. The work has really only just started for us, so we're continuing to improve the best practices themselves, but also we're working on the accessibility and practical applicability using the user guides that I mentioned before. And of course, an initiative like this, it's really important to have the community involved, because these best practices need to represent the best practices of the community as a whole. So we are looking to very actively engage that entire community. And yeah, you may interpret that also as an invitation. So please visit our website to get the best practices either in PDF format or to find the link to the wiki style portal, where you can also directly contribute to the best practices. And if you're even more interested in helping out, we are always looking for volunteers. Please drop us an email, also for any questions you might have later. And you can always also follow us on LinkedIn for updates. Thank you very much for your attention, and I think we can answer some questions now.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I'll say something after the question and answers. Questions from the audience or from the panel? Questions, comments, etc.
So I have one question. So,
go.
So are the best practices more geared towards products than towards ML research, or do you see, do you think there's a distinction between best practices for research versus best practices for ML products?
Yeah, I actually never really thought about it in that much detail. We specifically designed them for products that are operationalized and machine learning algorithms that apply their results to actual people and the environment. So if there is research that also directly influences individuals or society, then I think it would apply, the best practice would apply here as well, but we've focused a bit more on products. Yeah, that's
correct.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
More questions, comments? Yes, Anthony.
Sure. Yeah, I'm interested. I guess you mentioned this eternal tension between focus on delivery and red tape. And obviously it's great if you can provide these best practices and people can read them and then follow them and not have to worry about all the red tape. But then the question is whether, how you balance the requirement there, because without the red tape, you also might find that delivery suffers for other reasons. So given your best practices, how would you recommend sort of, and then as you also highlighted, sort of diminishing percentage of what actually needs to be done and the increasing percentage of all the rigmarole around it. So how would you consider redesigning those processes in a way that guarantees still the outcomes that are obviously desirable for everyone?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Let me think. I could talk for a really long time about that. I think the short answer would be, so a lot depends on the organization and what they can provide. So if you have multiple product teams, you can get rid of a lot of overhead by doing a lot of stuff centrally, by supplying your teams with the right kind of support, the right kind of tools, the right kind of context as well. Because if your organization, well, your organization is already a lot more context specific than the generality of the best practices, right? So as a company, you can already define the context much more clearly, and then take the best practices that we have and make them more specific to your case. And then the product teams themselves don't have to do that anymore. So there's a lot of overhead you can save right there. The other point about red tape is also completely true, of course, that it seems like red tape can stop delivery. But one of the points that I mentioned all the way in the beginning is that if you don't have the red tape in the beginning, you will run into problems all the way at the end. So it might seem like you're delivering, but you're actually not. So, and this is more of an attitude thing that people would have to understand. But again, it's not just about the data scientists or the engineers to understand it. It's really also about the managers and governance understanding this as well. Yeah, I could say a lot more things about this, but maybe can I ask you if this answered most of the question, or if there's still something specific you'd like to hear?
Yeah, I think it's what came up just after I was speaking as well. It's a lot of it is, and these best practices are maybe an aid in that. A lot of it is about a change in philosophy.
Yeah, we definitely hope so. Yeah, thanks.
Selmer, you want to say something?
I would like to ask for something, but if Salman was
okay,
go ahead. I keep my order. I stick his order.
You want to talk, Andrew?
I have a question. Yeah,
Okay, go.
Okay, Salman, are you? Because Salman, you seem to be earlier asking or trying to ask.
I don't hear Selmer, so go
okay,
ahead then.
Okay, then, okay. Okay, so I have a very simple example. Yeah, data collection from community or whatever. The example is from medical science. So the future in, for instance, cancer treatment is individualized treatment plan. And probably in many areas, that's the future. It's clear now, everybody knows. So it's no longer will be chemotherapy for everybody, every cancer and those kind of things, yeah? So, but this individualized treatment is not simply targeting each individual, but probably it will be, there will be intermediate layers like, special populations like Pakistani community in because of the genetic makeup of the Pakistanis in general, and so on, or the Black Afro-Americans, and so on and so on. So these kind of strategies which probably facilitate or speed up the individualized nailing down the individual treatment plan if identify smaller groups or narrow it down or so. But these kind of investigations and looking at data necessarily lead to all sorts of possible discriminative views and all sorts of political issues. They might raise, including insurance, life insurance, and all sorts of issues. So I was wondering, what's the strategy, for instance, in this example on learning algorithm that could do smart things, identifying, targeting populations for who are susceptible to certain type of cancer, and so on and so on. You see my point?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. It's a bit of a broad question. What is the strategy? So the technical best practices, I think a lot of them will apply to this particular case. We've got about 80 pages worth of best practices. So I can't really summarize all of them. So the general strategy would be to first do a bit of an assessment of where the highest risks are, in which sections, so let's say in which of these subjects, and then start with those. I could imagine, just from the top of my head, that some of the most important things to do are indeed fairness and non-discrimination. So just making sure that the model is not just equally performing on all the various populations, but also you have to pick, if there's a risk of discrimination, you have to pick a discrimination metric to check against. And then one of the other things that is probably very important is to do a sort of ethical matrix analysis. I don't know if you're familiar with these, but in ethical matrix, you try to identify all the possible stakeholder groups and all the possible sort of damages that could be done to them in terms of physical harm or being treated disadvantageously, or I think there's also justice harms, and there's another harm that I momentarily forgot. So once you do that that analysis, you try to do them with all the possible stakeholder groups. You identify, again, multiple, you try to identify the highest risks again. And then based on that, you go deeper into the best practices. The last one probably is explainability. So explainability comes in many forms. I think in this case, explainability would be required for both the medical professionals, and they need a different kind of explanation of the algorithm than the patients, and they need a different kind of explanation for regulators, probably. So these are probably the places that I would start. Actually, also human-centric design, human in the loop, I think is probably very important here as well. Yeah, difficult to summarize that question. I hope it was useful like this.
Okay, I see how the mechanism for the process would work. Roughly you highlighted the ethical metrics and all these technical issues, which I'm not aware of. I was not aware of. Okay, thank you.
More comments? More questions? No? Okay. I just wanted to say that when I found it, I found it amazing, really, because it's really, really needed. At the time, machine learning people are being literally bombarded by the pressures to produce algorithms because the market needs, and also by the pressure of a body of potential regulators and ethical people that really go behind the process. I mean, this technological revolution, in fact, goes a bit ahead of us, and demands of the market are so big, and we have seen this with COVID during the pandemics. The demand is so high that technicians, they have to solve problems, they have to put to produce the algorithms, and they haven't much mental space, though they have a consciousness, of course, but to be aware of all the issues involved, and in the end may result something that is not so good, or I think they may even feel a bit lost in the middle of so much pressure. And I think that something, a tool like this, which to me it's really a very, very important tool. It's like a drop of water in the desert. Okay, it's a contribution, it's very well organized, and it's from someone that has the experience, someone, I mean a group that has the experience of the thing and knows exactly what is demanded, and that this depends on context, depends on organizations, depends on a holistic view that doesn't involve just the programmers, but involves the whole organization system and the whole society ultimately. But at a micro, at different micro levels, the impact is huge, and there's assistance needed. And I think this is a very, very good, an excellent, I mean, tool so that people can rely on, at least organize their work, and of course they can change, they can even interact with the tool and tell, okay, I find this would be better this way, I think this would come first, and I think that's the goal of the organization you have produced is in fact to enhance this interaction with people that are really alone. That's what I feel. I'm not a machine learning engineer, but or a programmer, but I think that's the way I would feel, a bit alone, because inside the organization there's this pressure to produce the algorithm that delivers this and that, and on the other hand there's the society's pressure on producing something that is adequate, that is human-centered, that is ethical designed from the start, and the specialist, the expert, is a bit alone in this process. And I think this is a very important tool in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those kind words. Excellent analysis also. I'm very happy to hear that this is indeed your interpretation of it. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve. Yeah. So thank you for saying it again. It means a lot to us. I'll definitely share it with the team.
Welcome. That's what I felt, because I'm always trying to follow what's going on, because because I am interested, and it's one of my lines of research. And when I found it, I said, great job. That's what I said, great job. Because it's really more than just regulatory work. It's important. Yes, it's fundamental that governance takes these steps and everything is regulated. It's fundamental that people have these guidelines, how to operate, how to organize their systems at the micro and macro level. And that's what your work does. Very good. Congratulations. And thank you for being here. just stay a bit longer, okay? Thank you.